Hello there. Mario Giacomelli always insisted that he wasn't a photographer. He was more of an abstract expressionist who worked with the photographic medium. I think the most inspiring thing about him and his work is that, given all of the limitations that he faced, he was able to forge a unique path for himself, and now is regarded as one of Italy's greatest photographers. His peasant roots are reflected in his work in that he expresses his strong devotion to the people and land around his village. The area is called MAXXI and it's on the east coast of Italy next to the Adriatic Sea. He doesn't try to disguise his work as documentary. His prints are strongly graphic and he pushes the contrast. A critic once said that he didn't want to document reality, he wanted to transform it. He was influenced more by the abstract expressionist painters like Alberto Burri and Lucia Fontana than he was by other photographers. In Europe, that type of artist was referred to as an informal painter. He was also drawn to the gritty Italian neo-realist film movement. The most famous director of this genre was probably Roberto Rossellini. So his work reflects a yearning to express his creative ideas and explore his interior landscape. His black and white images often look like pencil drawings, and the actual details are not obvious at first glance.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the...
He was born into poverty in 1925 in a town called Senigallia. His father died when he was 9 years old, and his mother worked as a washerwoman in a local hospice. He didn't take to school and dropped out at the age of 16. He started working as a typesetter at the local printing shop. It was the type of place where people printed things like brochures and wedding invitations and that kind of thing. Working here, he learned the fundamentals of page design. And you can see how his knowledge of graphic printmaking becomes integrated into his photographic work.
Man darf meinen Besuch nicht nach demselben Maßstab messen wie die üblichen diplomatischen politischen Besuche.
After the horrors of World War II, he returned and helped to rebuild the print shop. It had been partially destroyed during the war. He was obviously creatively minded because he taught himself how to paint, initially doing abstract paintings, and he also wrote poetry. In 1950, he left his job and opened his own printing business called Tipografia Marchigiana in Senigallia. He also bought himself a Corbeil camera, which is fairly basic. It uses 120 film and produces 6 by 9 centimeter frames. He adapted this camera and would often complain that he had to hold it together with tape. Initially, he could only photograph on Sundays because his print shop was open for the other 6 days of the week. He started with the usual snaps of his family and friends, but he began to see the potential that photography had to explore self-expression, in a similar way to how the contemporary painters were delving into abstraction. He came up with a method of holding the extremes, so he had pure blacks and bright whites, but he would allow various shades of grey to appear throughout his frames. He accentuated the contrasts by using fast film and high contrast paper. He also used flash and sometimes experimented with other darkroom techniques. Also, on an artistic level, he allowed the real and the surreal to merge. His images are deliberately grainy, and he was happy to allow any imperfections to creep into the frame. If he felt that an image was missing a detail or two, Like in this one, he felt he needed a few trees in the foreground, so he just scratched them in. His photographs are quiet and melancholic, more meditations on themes like the passage of time, memory. He was very close to the landscape, the earth, also things like love and suffering. When photographers play around with the medium, it's easy to slip into the gimmicky territory. But with most of his work, he manages to create scenes that fall into the realm of the otherworldly. He's transforming familiar scenes into something that's mysterious. One particular series, initially called Young Priests, was made in the 1960s at the town seminary. It doesn't snow very often on the Adriatic coast, maybe 2 or 3 days a year. So the rarity of this event, it probably explains why the priests are so joyful. These scenes were perfect for his high contrast aesthetic, and he shot them at fairly low shutter speed, so the priests look like they're floating above the snow. The essay, initially called Young Priests, was later retitled to I Have No Hands That Caress My Face. The line comes from an anti-fascist priest called Father Tiroldo, who led the church resistance against Nazis during the war. Tiroldo's words were expressing how lonely it could be to follow a life of Christian service. Poetry was a strong and consistent component of his life. He started writing poetry in his 20s, and he also integrated other poems into his work. One of his favorites was L'Infinito, which means infinity, written by Leopardi Canti. It's about a man sitting on top of a hill, trying to merge with the infinite by reaching into the landscape in front of him. Giocomelli produced a series of photographs in which he delves into the theme of this poem and explores the infinite through his graphic landscapes. He took these from the window of an aeroplane. He created several essays in response to different poems. He wasn't trying to illustrate them. He wanted to rather describe their essence and seek out the emotions that are associated with them. At the end of this Infinity series, he takes the process beyond the poem by merging the infinite with the present. You can see how the shadows, the highlights, and the details all mix in together. For a long while, Giacomelli was only really known for the Priest series and for this image, which became known as the Scano Boy. He took this photograph and others in a nearby town called Scano, where most of the inhabitants wore black. So again, it fitted really well with his aesthetic. He and his work became more well known in 1964 when John Sikowski bought a number of his photographs for the permanent collection of MoMA. In 2022, there was an interesting exhibition staged at the Museum MAXXI in Rome. It's the National Museum of Contemporary Art and Architecture. They juxtaposed Giacomelli's photographs with the paintings by Informal artist Alberto Burri. These two men had been friends for a long time and often grappled with similar ideas about reworking landscapes to appear abstract. It's only when the museum put these works side by side that the strong parallels become obvious. So to return to my earlier comment about him transcending his limitations. He grew up in poverty. He lost his father at the age 9. He lived in a fairly unremarkable town in the Italian sticks. He had a camera which is now worth a lot of money because it's rare, but it was basically a dud. He had to endure the grim war years. He had no education in the arts and left school early. He also had to work 6 days a week in his print shop to take care of his family. So he had limited time to work on his own photography. But given all these restrictions, he still managed to build a body of work that has enduring significance. This is a beautiful tomb of a book. I don't know how many pages, hundreds of pages, worth looking at. He died in 2000. I'll leave it there, but thanks for staying with me. Cheers.